Day 4! It's day 4 of our 5-day World Watercolor Month painting challenge, and today we are painting a beautiful twilight snowy mountain. In this project, we're going to ramp up the technique just a little bit with the glazing that we practiced on day 2 with more layers, this time paying even more attention to the color value. Color value is the lightness or darkness of a color, and when you're trying to paint particularly a snowy mountain, instead of using white paint like you might with a different medium, with watercolor you're going to utilize negative space. So we want to pay attention to using darker color values a little bit at a time to paint around the white space and build up texture and contrast while leaving a lot of the paper white to mimic snow. We're also going to practice what's called a gradient, specifically using the wet on wet technique to paint the sky, a really beautiful blend of yellow and indigo to mimic the look of the sky almost nearing nighttime. All right, let's get started. As we're painting this project, I want you to pay special attention to 3 specific watercolor techniques. We're first going to create a gradient, which is a subtle shift in color from one color to the next in the sky. Then we're going to use the negative space technique to carve out white space in the mountain, and then we're going to use glazing with different layers to build up detail on the mountain using color value from gradually starting light and then getting darker. So first things first, we're painting the sky, and you can start with a pencil sketch for the outline of the mountain if you want, or you can do what I did and just kind of eyeball it, but basically we are getting the whole sky area wet. So like the top, like maybe 1/3-ish of, right? It's 1/3 maybe plus a little bit of the sky wet with clean water. And then the edge of the sky is going to be the ridge of the mountain, right? So the edge of the sky is the ridge of the mountain, which is why it looks kind of like choppy and angled and going up like that. While the sky is wet, I'm going to take some really, really watery new Gamboge, which is that orangey yellow, and I'm going to paint it right along the bottom of the sky. So really watery, really light value new Gamboge. This is going to be the lingering sunlight, right? This is twilight, when night is kind of pushing its way into the sky and the sun is going down, and we still have that just like little glow of yellow. Now this is the tricky part. Yellow and blue together make green, right? And purple and yellow are complementary colors, which means when you mix purple and yellow, you're going to get brown. So you can't, whenever you try to mix yellow with violet, which is what the twilight color is, you're at risk of making it super muddy. And so one tip is to make the sky more like a blue violet instead of strictly violet, like a warm French Ultramarine plus Quinacridone Rose, like a blue violet. The next trick is when you're making a gradient with 2 colors that maybe don't mix quite as well, use a lot of water, especially between the yellow and the twilight color. Use a lot of water. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is make a very subtle yellow glow along the bottom that gradually gets slightly darker and darker. So we did 1 layer, and then to make the sky, especially the night sky part, a little more vibrant, I dried that layer and then re-wet with clean water so that the first layer sets, so that the color is going to stay. And then I'm going to take my size 6 brush instead of my large wash brush, and I'm going to mix some Payne's Gray with French Ultramarine to get kind of like a muted blue. And starting from the top with my size 6 brush, which means I can get a higher paint to water ratio, which makes me be able to paint with slightly darker paint. And then I'm going to paint from the top so that it's darker at the top and then gradually move down. And then I'm going to do the same thing, except with yellow in reverse, right? So I'm using the new Gamboge, and I'm still using my size 6 brush so that I don't have tons of water specifically in this layer. And then I'm just adding a little bit of yellow to brighten up the yellow. So doing 2 layers kind of helps to decrease the chance of muddiness between the yellow and the violet blue. Next, I'm using white gouache. This is Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. And the sky is still wet. This is important. It's okay if the sky is dry because you can make gouache blurry after it's dried. But right now, the sky is still wet. And I did that because I want the stars to be kind of blurry. I want it to be kind of hazy, not like super bright, vivid stars necessarily. So I splattered some white gouache on the still wet sky. And then I went back with my brush for the particularly opaque white stars, and with a clean round number 2 brush, I just tapped water on the really defined white gouache stars so that I can get them to be blurry and twinkly. Okay, now we're going to move on to the mountain after I dried the stars. I'm using a foliage brush here, a DIY foliage brush, which is a size around number 10 that I just cut up to make the bristles really uneven. And I'm getting the mountain wet with clean water. Remember, this is a snowy mountain, and so to paint snow, we're not actually painting snow, we're painting the shadows around the snow. So I'm going to use a foliage brush on purpose so that my strokes are very choppy, so that I don't have to focus on trying to be imperfect. And then I mixed a lot of water with Payne's Gray to make it this really, really light value gray. And I'm just doing really choppy strokes, like in zigzags, on the wet wash on the mountain so that it looks really hazy and really blurry, but I'm still leaving behind little zigzag strokes, little random strokes of white space, right? We're slowly building up the snow by gradually building up shadow. We started with the wet on wet layer and then dried it. And now I'm going to use a wet on dry layer. And so I want this layer to be slightly more textured, which is why I'm not re-wetting the mountain. I'm doing it wet on dry so that we're getting pretty clear defined strokes. The paint, though, is still super watery. That's the most important part. And when you're painting little shadows and blurry, textured, blurry strokes on a mountain, you're going to feel really inadequate. You're going to feel like you have no idea what you're doing. You're going to feel like this doesn't at all look like a mountain, and that's fine. The most important thing is that you get choppy, blobby strokes on the mountain. And if you're wondering, how do I move my brush? First of all, I don't always know how I'm moving my brush. I just practice painting random things. But if you want some kind of movement, painting in a zigzag or painting at an angle or making kind of loose triangles, that's typically a really good way to go about painting shadows on a mountain. Next, I'm going to take my smaller size 2 foliage brush, which I made DIY by just spreading the bristles. I ruined this brush. It's just a foliage brush now. And I'm taking some Payne's Gray, slightly darker value, to make the trees. And to make the trees, I'm going at an angle. I'm kind of making loose zigzag lines only in a few spots. One of the most important things when you're building up layers of a mountain is the darker you get, the less paint you need. You don't, especially when you're trying to paint a snowy mountain, we're not trying to cover this mountain in dark shadows. We want the dark trees, the dark shadows, to accentuate and add contrast to highlight the snow. And in turn, we want there to be a lot of snow so that it highlights the trees, right? So I started with the foliage brush, with the size 2 foliage brush to kind of give myself an outline for where I want the tree lines to go. And then I'm going in with a regular round number 2 to just paint little vertical marks to mimic trees. Whenever we're painting like this, we're painting very loose. We're not trying to capture realism. We're trying to imply detail and let our brains fill in the rest. So there we go. there's my signature because I'm a real artist. I'm going to sign my paintings. And that is the Twilight Slopes project. Remember, as you go about painting your own Twilight Slopes project, less is more when it comes to adding dark value like the trees. It can be so easy to go overboard. So remember to paint less than you think you will actually need. Also remember, as you are adding the gray layers, right? Like we started with a really, really light value gray, then just a slightly darker but still light value gray. You're gonna think, oh, I'm ruining it and I'm ruining the snow. But no, because when you add the dark layer, it's going to make all the really light gray layers still look like shadowy snow. So it's gonna be okay. And remember, mountains are inherently imperfect and irregular. They're created through erosion. They're created through lots of really, complex geographic, scientific, whatever things over millennia. They are naturally imperfect. So your hand making just blobs, that's just fine. You are still mimicking and channeling the imperfection that is in nature, and I hope that you have so much fun. So, what did I love? What did I learn? I really, really loved the blurry stars. I thought that just kind of like distant, hazy stars in the distance looked really cool. I really had such a fun time building the layers on this mountain, and the splash of yellow in the bottom, I think, turned out really well. What did I learn? To create a mountain with negative space is really fun, and also I need to have a lot of compassion with myself when painting a mountain, and that's okay. So I hope you had a lot of fun painting with me. I always do with you, and I will see you next time, my friend.